Alright, so this video is going to be a really thorough overview of, or review of supply. And so supply starts out with the law of supply just like demand starts out with the law of demand. And the law of supply states that all other things equal, which is super important again, and again in Latin that's ceteris paribus, so these two mean the same thing. Producers will supply more of a good at higher prices and less of a good at lower prices. So if price goes up, then supply goes up, and then if price goes down, that means that supply goes down. So this is the opposite of demand. For demand, when price went up, demand went down, and when price went down, demand went up. But here, supply goes down. And this should make some kind of intuitive sense again. If you can't get a lot to sell a good, you probably aren't going to make a lot of it. And if you can get a lot for something, you're probably going to make a ton of it because you're making a bunch of money. Okay, so the next thing is that supply is a relationship between price and quantity, again, holding all other things equal. So if you change anything besides price or quantity, this is this last line here, you shift the supply curve, which is a change in supply. But if you change price or quantity, you will move along the same supply curve, and we call that a change in quantity supplied. So now I want to go ahead and talk about drawing a supply curve. So let's say apples are $1. And again, we're talking about apples just like we were in the last video. And that's supposed to be a dollar sign and then a 1. So if you can get $1 for every apple you sell, people probably, at $1 an apple, it's not going to be very profitable in the US to farm apples. So let's go ahead and say then that, I don't know, maybe there are 10 million apples farmed a day. So we'll call it, you know what, let's make it 1 million apples farmed a day. Now, if it's $3 an apple, that seems a little bit more reasonable. It seems like you could make a bit of a profit doing that. So if apples are $3, then let's say people farm 20 million apples a day. And then if apples are $5, it seems like you could make a killing doing that. So people will farm a bunch of apples, and let's say that they'll do 40 million apples a day. So when you connect these dots, you get the supply line, and we normally just label it S. So again, this is holding all other things equal. If the price of apples is higher, as price goes up, quantity increases, and that gives us the supply line. And so we'll label this A, B, and C. So let's say that apples were selling for $1 last year, and this year they're selling for $3 an apple. Well, probably some farmers are going to shift from farming oranges maybe and go ahead and farm apples. So that will lead to more apples being produced, which would lead to a change in quantity supplied, as we move from point A to point B, from point A to point B. Again, that was because the price of apples increased. Now, let's say that we change something else. Let's say that all of a sudden, that a hurricane hits. Where do they grow apples? They grow apples in Washington, and it's hard for a hurricane to hit Washington. But let's say that something happens in Washington so that no more apples are grown, and let's just call it a hurricane so that I can keep on talking about hurricanes. So if a hurricane hits Washington, that's going to decrease the supply of apples because there are less people producing apples. The apple supply got just completely demolished. So that would decrease supply, and that would be a shift to the left in supply. And so to the left is a decrease, to the right, so this we'll call this S1, and this would be S2. And so this is a decrease from S to S1 is a decrease, and from S to S2 would be an increase in supply. And again, this is an increase in supply, and you can't even read that. Increase and a decrease in supply, where moving from A to B would be a increase in quantity supplied. So I'll just write quantity supplied because I don't have too much space. Okay, so what causes the supply curve to shift? So if the price of inputs to making apples, let's say, changes. So let's say fertilizer becomes more expensive. So if fertilizer, the price of fertilizer goes up, then it's going to be more expensive to produce apples. So there will be a decrease in the supply of apples. So fertilizer is more expensive, so then there's a decrease in the supply of apples because it's more expensive to produce apples. Decrease in price, or sorry, not in the price, in the supply of apples. And vice versa. If the price of fertilizer were to get cheaper, if fertilizer gets cheaper, then there will be an increase. In the supply of apples because it'll be cheaper to produce apples. So the one that I was already talking about, the number of producers, that's what I was talking about with the hurricane. So if the number of producers increases, supply increases, and if the number of producers decreases, then supply would decrease, and that would be like this line over here. So the next one is productivity or technology changes. So if productivity gets better or technology gets better, that will lead to an increase in supply. So let's say all of a sudden, let's say this was when the tractor was invented to plow and it makes no sense for apples because they grow on trees, but let's say to plow your cornfield. So that would be an increase in productivity, and it would then be cheaper to produce corn, so more people would produce it, and there would be a greater supply. So an increase in productivity or technology leads to an increase in supply, and a decrease in productivity or technology leads to a decrease in supply. Then I've done a video on the change in the price of substitutes, and I'm going to talk about the change in expected future prices here and the change in expected future input prices. So for the change in expected future prices, if I think that prices are going to be higher in the future, so if I think prices will go up in the future, prices will go up in a month. I will produce less now. And save it for when prices are higher, and produce more in a month. So that will decrease the supply right now. More in a month, which decreases supply today. Decreases supply today. And then vice versa, if I think prices will go down in a month, and I have extra crops that I'm holding on to, I will produce more now. I will produce more now and produce less in a month, and produce less in a month, which will increase supply today. And then change in expected future input prices works the opposite way. So I'll just go ahead and write this out because I think that it's probably worth it. So if I think the input prices will go up in a month, then I will produce more now because it's cheaper to produce it now. So I will produce more now and then less later because it will be more expensive later, which will be an increase in supply today. And you can see that that's the opposite of what we have up here. increase supply today. And so vice versa, if I think input prices will go down in a month, and I'll try and use a different color to keep this mildly coherent, will go down in a month, I will produce less now because it'll be cheaper in the future. I will produce less now and produce more later. Let me erase that. Produce more later, which will be a decrease in supply today. So that's really all that I want to say about supply. I hope that that was clear. If it wasn't, let me know. And also, the last thing that I want to say is that some classes don't talk too much about these different things that shift the supply and demand curve. So if you haven't seen like these last three before, especially, if you haven't seen those three in your class before, don't worry too much about them. But a lot of classes do also cover them, so I wanted to cover them here. And I will see you in the next video.